You're listening to Music Tectonics.
Welcome back to Music Tectonics, where we go beneath the surface of music and tech. I'm your host, Dmitri Vietze. I'm the CEO and founder of Rock, Paper, Scissors, a PR firm that specializes in music and tech. And we are back on the NAMM trade floor. And today I've got with me Ryan Harlin, who handles content and marketing at Reason Studios. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm doing well. I've been pacing myself. Day 3 of NAMM. I'm hanging in there.
Awesome. That's great. You've been to NAMM before, I assume.
I've been to NAMM. I don't know if this is my 18th consecutive year, but I've been coming for 18 years.
Oh my!
I might have missed a couple here and there. So
that's awesome. Well, we'll get into NAMM a little bit since you're a veteran. We might find out some cool tips and stuff you like to do when you're here and that sort of thing. But let's kick it off with an overview of Reason for anyone who somehow missed what it is up to now.
Sure. So Reason's been actually coming to NAMM as long as I have, though I haven't been coming to NAMM
Reason.
As Reason, yeah. So it's before my time. So Reason is currently the company that makes Reason is called Reason Studios.
Right.
That's a new name for the company.
Yeah.
So people might historically know Reason from Propellerhead Software, which was the first brand that we were under that put it out, and basically. Reason was an outcropping of Rebirth, which was a piece of music software in the 90s that was the big democratizing music making revolution of the sort of mid 90s. And what Rebirth did was in the early days of computer based music, when people were still wondering, is it possible? And things looked a lot more like a terminal prompt than they did an instrument. What Rebirth did is it took the 3 most desired pieces of music hardware at the time, the 303 that was big in Euro house dance music, the 808 and the 909, and it put it on your computer screen at a cost that was a fraction of what it would take to make the music that was being made with that hardware in the real world.
So you made a virtual version of those 3 instruments.
A virtual
altogether.
version, and it was revolutionary in the sense that it both looked like the hardware and functioned like the hardware you knew, but it actually sounded like it too, because our DSP guru and founder named Pele, he managed to model and actually get the behavior. So suddenly a kid who was listening to dance music and wanting the sound of that 303 bass line could get it, and he didn't have to be spending the $3,000 that he would have been paying for a 303 on the used market for a broken one, in 1996. He suddenly could buy Rebirth and he could make that. And from that, the evolution became Reason, which was a sort of the big brother of the Rebirth concept. It was again us pushing the envelope of what is possible with computer music making in 2001 when it came out, and we followed again the sort of the real life metaphor that people could relate to. We gave you a studio rack on your computer screen. We gave you synths, effects, drum machines, samplers, loop players, all the things that were the tools of the trade for music production, but running in your computer, but running in a virtual studio rack where you could, literally rearrange your devices, control your signal chain. And at the time, and still what blows people away when they see it, is you hit the tab key on your keyboard and your rack flipped around to the back, and suddenly you were looking at the cables that we were all familiar with and are all still familiar with. If you look at any guitar pedal board out on the NAMM show floor right now, we were all used to this idea of routing cables from a point A to a point B. And so you weren't control clicking and looking through context menus for how to use this software. You were using it the way that you could. Had
a real tactile look to it.
Yeah, real tactile look. And it was very intuitive to kind of, if you thought of a signal flow, I want this thing to go to that synth and then to be controlled by this, signal generator. You could just wire it up. It was a very intuitive way of working.
So what year are we talking when that?
That's 2001, I think.
Okay.
That Reason 1.0 launched.
And were other companies doing that kind of virtual look to their interfaces?
There was, so the term that, I don't know when the term came into vogue of skeuomorphic design, which is what that fell under. There were some people kind of doing it on the front end. Uh-huh. Nobody really does it in the back end where you flip it.
Oh,
yeah,
that's cool.
That's still something that has just kind of been our uniqueness, and it really is people who use Reason really kind of take to it very quickly because of that, but they also really come to love the way of thinking of sound as a signal routing. You know?
Right, gotcha.
So, but anyway, so it's evolved over the years. It started as a synth rack and samplers. It had a fairly basic sequencer, and then like all software products, there's iterative updates, and it around 2008 or 9, it became a full-fledged DAW with audio recording and a full mixer and the whole everything you could imagine a DAW being. It became that, and we sort of entered. In the years before that, propeller head was pretty clear to say, well, we're not a DAW. We're not a DAW. That's a different thing. And they had all sorts of philosophical ideas about we don't want to be a workstation. A workstation doesn't sound fun. We don't want to be a workstation. We're and then around 2008 or 9, once we added all those features, we sort of thought, okay, we're a DAW. Okay, we've made our peace with the term, and we are one. So.
Well, because you went from just kind of being an instrument and wanting to give people all the tools of production that a DAW provides.
Right. It happened fairly organically that the more people loved Reason, the more they were asking to do and stay in Reason. So, at the time that it was created, it was a way to kind of create, synths and drum patterns.
Right.
But suddenly it's like, but I want to record my vocals, and hey, I play guitar too, and I'd like to layer some guitars in here. And so as that kind of spun off, then it was the very natural thing to become to join the DAW world, as it were.
Right.
Yeah.
And so let's bring it up to speed. I mean, you guys had some big news last year. Where are you guys going from what you just described in the most recent?
So in a weird way, the big headline is that Reason's not a DAW. But no, what I mean by that, though, is actually it's we have... We've had a big shift. It was a tectonic shift, if you will, in Reason Studios, sort of the next era of Reason Studios, in the sense that with Reason 11, we added the new features that we add to our Reason DAW, the standalone now, as we call it, Reason Standalone. But we also now give you Reason in another variant, which is we now can run Reason as a plugin inside other DAWs. And so for anyone out there, I'll sort of try and describe this maybe in a way that is not quite so jargon techy.
Awesome.
People who make music work within this sort of holistic end-to-end production platform. There's a lot of them out there. It's the thing where they put their instruments, they record their audio, they mix their music, they export it for final release. If you want to make an album, these days you are almost certainly working in a DAW, and some of them have become household names in the sense of Pro Tools and things like that, that even if you're not a music producer deep in the weeds, you might hear some of these names. Those are DAWs. That's what you work in as a production. But within those DAWs, the instruments you use, the synths that you might use, the virtual piano that you might add to your song, the effects, or some of the things that kind of generate some of the tones, like some of the more hardware-based algorithmic note generators, like a lot of the sort of experimental tech that goes into music production. Those things run as what are known as plugins. And there's big plugin formats out there. VST plugins is one of them. Audio unit plugins is another format. And they run inside of the DAWs, which are referred to as a host. So you've got your DAW that you work in, you run your plugins. And Reason was a standalone DAW unto itself. It was one of those platforms that you worked in. And we had our own and we do have our own plugin format. It was called Rack Extensions. But we were sort of somewhat of a walled garden in that sense, that up until 2000 and maybe 13 or 14, we didn't. You couldn't run a VST plugin format inside of our DAW. Our DAW had its own plugin format, its own instruments that it came with, and you worked inside of it. We opened that up to letting you load those third-party VST plugins around 2014, but the big thing this year, that came out last year, it's the big news this year too, is that we now will run Reason as a VST plugin. So we're going the other direction. Now we are one of those, that our rack, the rack that people love, that you can, cable and patch and create your own custom sounds, that's now running inside other DAWs, inside other hosts, as it were.
So people who were kind of locked into another walled garden now have this bridge between your instruments and your effects in their world.
And people who use these DAWs, these hosts, you're very particular to your, and understandably, when you choose one, you spend hundreds of hours learning it. And
It's hard to switch.
It's hard to switch, and you become. I mean, you also develop a very personal, even emotional relationship to this thing. It's this thing that helps realize your creative vision. So it's your partner.
Right.
It's probably the most consistent partner you have. You know, like bandmates come and go, but you know, your DAW host that you work in is your creative partner, and so you become very attached to it. And telling someone, you know what, switch over to ours, ditch that one and switch over, is a much harder proposition, and almost, you know, not something. I mean, I have my own preferred DAW that I like Reason Standalone. I work in Reason Standalone, but it would be a hard proposition to tell me to start using something I'm unfamiliar with. But in this way, we're not making that pitch to people anymore. We're saying, you know, a lot of people might have used Reason at one point, tried it, but then they may have moved on to another DAW. And we're saying you can get all your sounds back, the synths you loved, but you can stay in the DAW that you are currently working in without having to, you know, completely abandon your learning curve and all the things you put into it.
Well, it's interesting. This mobility factor of sounds and effects is kind of a theme we're hearing at NAMM, of, you know, the connection between different systems, whether they're hardware or software or plugins or whatever.
Right.
And you know, at Music Tectonics, we talk about these seismic shifts, and one of them is, you know, music production's in the hands of the masses. And I could imagine that. We can hear the big bass next door as the trade hall starts to wake up here on Saturday morning.
You can put in note to self: roll off below 150 hertz.
Right. So, you know, that mobility really creates ease for people because they don't have to keep learning new systems, right? Once they get into one place, they get to continue to adapt and adopt new sounds, new effects, new techniques that they couldn't before. So it's interesting to think about what is the effect on creativity of these very seemingly almost commercial and technical possibilities.
Sure.
As that happens.
Well, you know, I mean, the truth is that in a perfect world, all of us that design these things don't even want you to have to learn one system. We want you to just create. You know, the learning is like, you know,
that's the hard part. That's the pain in the ass.
It's the pain in the ass. You know, when I got into audio engineering as a 14-year-old kid, I remember my parents got me a bunch of gear, and for the first 2 weeks, I sat on the floor in my dining room reading the manuals, and they were going out of their minds because, like, they would walk by, they go, "Don't you want to turn it on?" And I was like, "Well, I'm just trying to learn it." I'm so glad I did. It was the best 2 weeks education I ever gave myself.
That's cool.
But, you know, the learning curve is actually, you know, what we would all love to have is that you have an idea, you have a drive, you have a musical spark in your head, and you can get down to making it, and you aren't wondering, how do I make this sound, or how do I realize this idea? You know, we just want to shorten that path as much as possible, and not only between platforms, but even within, you know, all the things that we design as well.
Right, makes sense. All right, so now we know what Reason is. You know where you're going. Before we go past that, I'm just curious what differentiates Reason. You talked about the flipping of the virtual instruments to getting to see the plugs and the wires and all that, the cables. Is there anything in terms of the sounds that people, are there words that people use to describe the sounds they get out of Reason, or the workflow?
Well, it's very, Reason is very synth driven. It is certainly, you know, beloved by sound designers, beat makers, people who are sort of in that. If you're making, you know, klezmer music, the Reason rack, maybe it's super cool. Maybe you're about to push the boundaries.
If you hybridize it.
Yeah. But it's definitely, its bread and butter is in amazing sounding synths, effects, drum machines. You know, it comes with tens of thousands of presets. It comes with gigabytes of samples of, you know, all the sort of modern drum sounds you want to layer together and that sort of thing. So in that sense, that's kind of where its wheelhouse
so
is.
So EDM, hip hop, electronic music,
Certainly.
and sound design are kind of the top.
But, you know, and then there's that element where that is so, there's so much crossover now, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the latest Maroon 5 record has EDM elements in it, right? Yeah. And it's like, so where's the line? It's a very blurry line. It's applicable to a lot of people, but that's certainly one of its things. Another thing that we do, if I can toot our horn, that we do really well is, so there's instruments, there's effects. We have a third class of device that you can include in the Reason rack. It's something called players. And a player it's a device. It doesn't generate any sound. It doesn't alter the sound or color the sound the way an effect would. But what it alters is actually incoming notes. So when you play notes on your keyboards, it will alter the notes that are coming in. So a classic example is if I don't know music theory, I can filter out the notes that aren't in a particular scale. So sort of smart keyboard type things that but then from there it becomes sky's the limit in terms of what you can imagine and what you can design. And so we've made devices that will turn single keys on a keyboard into massive anthemic big chords for like a club anthem, or we've got things that do drum programming for you. Or with you, I should say. This gets into it's not making music for you; it's helping you make music.
Right.
And some of those things, like the music theory thing. Like I went to college for music. I understand music theory, but my gosh, is it nice sometimes to explore like B flat Lydian. Maybe I'm going to work in B flat. I don't know what that sounds like, but I can sort of get into that mode of deep music theory.
That literal mode.
Literal mode. That's right. Yeah, the modal scale of B flat Lydian. I can get into that sort of tonality in a way and explore that creativity. So these players, there's other things out there that do what it's sort of a class of a thing called a MIDI effect, which is a little bit of a kind of technical term. We do them in a very special way, an intuitive way, and the people who use them, it really does become a creative lubricant that brings ideas out of you where you're not stuck fighting the technology. You're just getting right to the creative thing that you're chasing.
So it is opening up all this creativity because you don't have to study as much and you don't have to spend as much time building up some of the elements. You can kind of grab them and start tweaking them to your own sound.
Certainly.
So it's like a little fast forward button on that 14-year-old sitting on the dining room floor a little bit, maybe.
Exactly right.
But still lots of creativity, creative possibilities regardless. So.
Right.
Hey, so what's your role at the company, Ryan? We haven't even gotten to that.
Right. So I do. I sort of produce all of the marketing content that you are likely to see. So if you, I should preface that the video content is kind of where my home lives. So our YouTube channel, I'll make all of the tutorial content that's on our YouTube channel. We do artist features where we'll visit an artist and kind of take a look at some of the work that they're doing with Reason. And we also do, if we're putting out a new product, we'll make a video kind of letting you know what it's about. But all that stuff is kind of the where I spend most of my day to day, and then I join in on the conversations related to the higher level campaigns and kind of talking
marketing
about
campaigns.
Yeah, marketing campaigns and sort of the figuring out. The messaging is such a corporate word. I don't like kind of thinking of it in that terms. But really, for me, it's I was a Reason user before I joined the company, and so I have I said people are very have that emotional connection to their platform. I have that in the way that I love the tool I use to make music. I want other people to understand what it can do for them, and so I want that. Yes, I'm getting that message out, as it were, but it's really that sort of evangelical side of things. That I'm just.
I was actually going to ask: are you a producer, artist? Tell us a little bit about what kind of music or sound you like to mess with.
Yeah, I mess with a lot, as I think all artists kind of do these days. It's you ask someone, "Oh, what kind of music do you do?" and they'll just start describing an entire Spotify, catalog. But so I wear the couple of hats I wear. I do electronic, sort of on the poppier side of electronic production, and I do some of that work I've done commercially. My brother's a video game music composer.
Uh-huh.
He came out of LucasArts and that whole world, and he's an orchestral scorer. And so when he has a project that comes up where it's like, oh, actually, they're kind of asking for more a Taylor Swift vibe, but with a little Beyonce. He'll bring me in on that and sort of, I'll
when it's less orchestral and a little
less
more poppy.
orchestral and more poppy. Yeah, that's
fun.
more.
So you're in some video games?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Can you say which one?
Yeah. Well, okay. So,
or do you know?
Yeah, no, I do. I do. Well, it's funny. Some of them, I'm not a gamer, so some of them, like I know I'm playing mandolin on some big game that everybody's playing right now, and I can't remember what it's called, but my mandolin's on there. But I did a bunch of music for the Dancing with the Stars, which I think in the UK is called. It's got a Strictly Come Dancing. It was a big, the TV show Dancing with the Stars.
Gotcha.
They put out an iPad version of that game, and I did a bunch of the songs that the celebrities in the game are dancing to.
Nice. It's funny you mentioned mandolin. I see you're wearing your Hardly Strictly Bluegrass Festival T-shirt.
So that's the other hat I wear, and that's almost I've gotten big into bluegrass. I play banjo. I play guitar. I sing, and that is almost. I've sort of thought of that as the therapy to the time I spend in the electronic world, because electronic and pop music production is about absolute perfection, and everything needs to line up, to a to a T on a grid and be flawless and live forever. And it's, and then bluegrass is about getting together with 5 people in a room, making music just in the moment.
Just for that moment.
And then it's gone. And there's something beautiful about that.
That's awesome. So you spend a lot of time making videos and explaining how things work, and then also engaging with artists and talking about how they're using Reason and things like that.
Right.
Cool. So let's broaden it out a little bit. We've gotten into some of this, but what have you seen happening in music making over the last, say, 1 to 3 years that differs from the previous era of music making? It's just the pace of change in technology is so fast, and it's just really changing how people listen, but also how people make music, sell music, distribute music, all that kind of stuff. I'm curious, from your seat, you have a cool vantage point of having these conversations inside the company about this stuff, and then interfacing with these artists out there who are doing cool stuff, and you're an artist doing everything from bluegrass to video games to electronic pop. What do you think's emerging right now?
On the artist side, the established artist side, I should say, the thing that continues to happen is that diversification that
genre and style.
If you're a producer, and you don't diversify, at least early on in your career, it's a sink or swim sort of thing. You need to be, sort of a master of many things as you're kind of getting started. So you see that diversification in certainly in the Reason user base, but in the wider music world. But the bigger thing that is going on between the music tech guys and the sort of, if you were to make a pie chart of people making music, and then you included people who want to make music but haven't really gotten into it yet, that's this far bigger slice of the pie. And those two groups, the music tech, the people who are making tools for those people, and those people, we're trying to understand each other. And it's, there's somewhat of a mystery of who are these people and what are they, what has stopped someone who wants to get into music making but hasn't yet? What is, I always think of my sister. My sister growing up was constantly like, she liked electronic music. She said, I'd love to make electronic music. And here she was, her brother worked in the industry, could give her a promotional copy of, a tool to do it. And yet she never quite it didn't resonate with her. It didn't, it wasn't the tool for her. And none of them were. That, she wanted to make something in a different way. And so the thing in this last 1 to 3 years that people are starting to kind of clue into is there's a different, when you want to make music, people who've been around for a while think that you want to make music, that means you want to make a fully polished, complete production that you then mix and master and put up on Spotify. Got it, sure. But actually, there's people that they don't want to get that far. They just want to have fun. They just want to it's the TikTok generation.
Creation and engagement are intermingling.
Yes, and it's that notion, the phrase the good enough generation, right? Of like, there's a whole class of music that they might deem good enough that someone who's been around for a while would be like, but that song's not done. It's only got a bass line and a drum beat, and it's and they don't quite match, but they're perfect. The person making is
that sounds
happy.
Like bluegrass, man. Right? You can play with a mandolin and a bass, and you'll be just fine.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. I in my banjo world, I do a lot of fiddle and banjo duet stuff. Yeah.
That's really probably better example than mandolin and bass, but yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, so the understanding of that sort of mentality and figuring out how can we make tools for those people as well, because that that's absolutely our goal at Reason Studios is to help people realize their musical dreams. We don't want to dictate to them what that dream should be. And if their dream is a simpler and more fun entertainment goal than what has been historically a very kind of rigid production environment that we have all been living in the DAW host world and the sort of computer music era, then we want to respond to that.
And it really is. I mean, we made the joke about fiddle and banjo, but it really is a little bit closer to what folk music was meant to be, or how it evolved, and
that's absolutely true.
How it was lived.
That's true. I've made that point that folk music really was just the music of the people. That was the music that was able to get into the hands of the people. When you go back to our old history of rebirth, like I was saying at the top of the podcast, that there was a sort of folk tradition in that we took these tools that were inaccessible and got them into the hands of people that hadn't been able to realize them before. And you can actually, musicologists far smarter than me could actually look at where popular music went, or where electronic music went, from the release of tools like another program we put out, Recycle, which was another revolutionary beat juggling, sample juggling software. That was actually the first product that we put out. And then Rebirth, there was actually a shift in where music went because of that. And so to be part of that legacy is actually pretty a cool kind of heritage to have.
Yeah, that's really cool. So have you seen artists that come from this kind of DIY, I don't care about what the formal training structure should be? Have you seen any emerge and actually start to release some stuff that leads to some success or at least some notoriety?
Oh, sure.
Anybody? I mean, I know I don't want to put you on the spot, but it's fun, after having this conversation, then to go to listen to something that's like an example of it.
Well, there's a guy. Now I'm going to forget his name, and I feel bad for forgetting his name on the spot. But there's a kid. I shouldn't call him a kid. He's a young man. But there's a guy who produced an album with Kendrick Lamar on his iPhone, using iPhone apps. And that was, because that's what he had. That's what he had access to, And I'm sure a lot of them started out, they were just the free apps. It wasn't even the paid apps that he was working with. And so you listen to his stuff, and it's amazing sounding. It's great. I mean, obviously, it was good enough for Kendrick Lamar. It's good enough for me. But it was certainly not done in that traditional way at the time that I think that was maybe 3 years ago or something that was kind of blowing up. And
is his name Steve Lacy?
Yeah, Steve Lacy.
I just looked it up.
There it is. Yeah,
okay,
Steve
cool.
Lacy. Thank you. Yeah.
Cool.
That's the guy, Steve Lacy. Yeah. When you listen to that stuff, what you're hearing is somebody who was following a creative instinct and wasn't being held back by what he had access to and the rules for how you were supposed to go about it. And the sound is just really cool, It's
that's
a really,
interesting. That's a good one. Thank you. And are there other anecdotes that have come out of the Reason artist producer community? Not necessarily those DIY new generation folks, but just any artists that are champions of Reason, or that you feel really exemplify some of the stuff we've been talking about.
Boy, there's some crazy stories that
we'll take the crazy stories too.
Okay, the craziest one that isn't exactly about artists was that I'm gonna paraphrase this, so I may get some of the details wrong, but people could look this up. I think it was in Colombia, the country of Colombia. There was a group of federal troops that were being held hostage by a group of the sort of drug guerrillas, and they were being held in this sort of remote area, and the government wanted to let them know that, okay, we're going to be coming to rescue you on this particular day, or this is what you need to get ready for our rescue. And the way that they did it is they made a pop song. They put Morse code into the drum beat, I think it was, or into the bass line or something like that. And they got the radio to play the song like it was just a song on the charts, so that the guys in the prison would overhear, coming over the loudspeakers, they would overhear the song, recognize the Morse code, and know what to do for their rescue.
Wow, and it worked?
It worked, yeah.
That is insane.
So that's the craziest story I probably have ever heard in terms of the impact. But now there's on the artist side of things, there's they're going to sound far less crazy in comparison. But I talk to artists all the time. I love talking to artists and hearing their stories. And for example, I did an artist interview with this guy who produces under the name Anonymous, and he did one of his claim to fame. He's done stuff with Timbaland, but he did that song with Nicki Minaj. What is it called? It sampled the old "Baby Got Back" intro. So, but anyway. He went from Atlanta to Hollywood to sort of seek fame and fortune, and he sort of exemplifies that the drive that the producers who use Reason have. He went to the airport. He had his clothing and his keyboard as his carry-on luggage. They said, "I'm sorry, sir, you can only take one piece of carry-on."
Left his clothing behind,
took his keyboard on a one-way ticket to L.A., and now he's working out of Universal Music Group's Studio A, and is doing great. So those stories are equally crazy in their own way. I love the sort of the ambition of that stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah, cool. So I want to take another turn here. The streaming era has turned the music industry upside down, and boosted it up with tons of growth. So on the one hand, it's kind of confusing, but on the other hand, everyone's seeing this growth and there's money coming in, so there's a lot of excitement, and fans are loving all the access to music. But in some ways, they have a more distant relationship maybe with artists, and a lot of the artists are not thrilled with the per stream rates. So, though others have cracked the code and they're doing just fine as well, we hear about that too. But how is the way that fans are listening to music, this streaming subscription, what some of the music tectonics circle will call music like water, how is that influencing the way people are making music?
Right. Well, it's in some ways it influences it very directly. I know an artist in the UK, Olivia Broadfield's her name. She's a songwriter, and she now will write her songs and structure them in a way that she knows music supervisors will find appealing to sync on a TV show. So it works out to literally the instrumentation. I'll start kind of sparse, and then I'll build so it gets more. So then by the end of the song, there's a part, if the editor of the show wants a really busy, dense production, they've got that. And if they want a sparse production, they've got it in the beginning of the song. And so there are people like that literally approach their songwriting process with the end goal and the monetization goal in mind.
Yeah.
And then obviously with streaming and stuff, there are people that, streaming is, we sort of have historically thought of streaming as like Spotify, or Tidal or any of the streaming services, as it were. But then there's this whole other type of streaming, which is like, if someone uses my music on a YouTube video, that becomes a monetized stream. And so music producers are starting to look at that as well and getting their music onto YouTube content, onto just anywhere else you can kind of get your music that actually has a monetization element to it. There's uses in Facebook as well where you can, videos on Facebook and stuff where you can actually claim, not in the litigious sense, but you can actually sort of claim your copyright and monetize your music in that way.
Right. Yeah. So that is influence. I mean, it's interesting. You go back to 45s were a certain length, extended play, EPs, all those things impacted what you could record.
Absolutely.
And, I think a lot of people kind of forget that or don't think about it. And then CDs at some point, there were people putting out 24 tracks on one album. It's like insane.
I read an article once that persuaded me pretty convincingly that CDs was part of what led to that late 90s, early 2000s devaluation of music, because they said the 74-minute length of a CD meant that, if you look at the era, the LP era to the CD era, you had a 33-minute album. You had to be choosy. You had to pick your best songs and put it on it. And suddenly you could put all that stuff that was not getting put onto the album, and suddenly you had this experience of like, oh, there's only one or two good songs on this 74 minutes of music. And so,
well, when people talk about being so upset about the difference in the per purchase arrangement between the fan and the rights holder, the owner, the label, whatever it is, the CD days, that was the heyday. And then I think about it as a fan, I'm like, I bought so many damn CDs that I only wanted one track off of.
My brother made a mix once that was labeled, it was a mix in the sense of like an actual mixtape. This is back in the day, but it was called I Bought This Album for One Song, and it was just all the one song album.
Yeah. I'd like to hear that album. That
it was
mixtape.
Pretty good, actually.
Of course it was. It was the best track off of all these albums, and there was a lot of glut on these CDs. And so, it's frustrating, I know, but in a way, in some ways, I mean, the music industry was kind of like, it was that was their walled garden, was the CD in a way. It's like, you got to buy it all. And then, they started doing some singles. Remember those cassette singles?
Yeah, right.
Which were super cheap and stuff. But
now, on the flip side, though, there's another element to that, which is I knew there's a producer, had a big club hit in sort of the mid-2000s. And when he had that hit, he got signed to a big UK dance label that I won't name and shame. But he had a meeting with them, and when he came in from the meeting, what they said to him was like, okay, now we do things differently here. You don't have to write a whole album. Just give us the hit. And he sort of had to explain to him, like, that's not how it works. I write music, and I can't tell you if it's a hit or not. You help me. I'll have my hunch, but often, like, the song that we're meeting because of that became a hit wasn't the one that I thought would be a hit. I can't
the one I cared about.
Yeah. He's like, I can't just serve you up just the hits. Like, you have to. There's a certain amount of like churn to get the good stuff.
And then in the digital era, you can do tons of churn. We are one of our clients is CD Baby, and we helped them kick off the DIY Musician Conference 5-6 years ago, doing all the programming and stuff. And we had Jack Conti from Pamplemousse.
Oh yeah, sure. Reason user.
Now, oh really?
Yeah. Jackson,
and now a founder of Patreon,
right,
and CEO of Patreon, did an amazing keynote, and it was largely about keep putting out content. Don't perfect it.
Right.
Don't worry about it. Put it out. let it go, move on, because every one of those is a fishing line, and you don't know when the fish are going to bite.
Absolutely.
And that's the newer version of, make a whole album and we'll figure out the hit later.
Yeah.
It's not making an album. Don't spend all this money pressing plastic and shipping it and having it returned or doing whatever else with it.
Right.
But just keep putting content out and see what the reaction is at the right moment. And that particular song will do what it needs to do. That's the life it was meant to live.
Certainly.
And it might be nothing.
That's right.
So that was kind of an interesting piece to this format shift as well.
They're a good example, and Pomplamoose is a good example of that. And actually, Jack's entire community on Patreon is that same thing. They are people that they've established a relationship with their fans where they say, if you like the concept of what I do, the overall concept, then I'll keep doing it for you, and I give you my word. That's the sort of the beauty of that relationship, is I give you my word that I'll keep sending you stuff if you'll keep supporting me.
And I had heard early on that obviously as a musician he built Patreon with music in mind, but that was not the community that initially started to have success there. It was actually graphic novel, comic book,
that makes sense.
Journalists, podcasters, filmmakers, things like that. But he stuck at it, and he was able to build the music community there now. So that's working. But I think it was that cultural shift, that ability for people to realize this is how you do it now, not how we used to do it.
Right.
Which is pretty interesting. So let's broaden out again. What sorts of emerging trends are you keeping an eye on in music creation, listening, and business? We talk a lot about things like AR and VR and artificial intelligence music generation, and live streaming of musicians and what platforms and techniques there are there, about smart speakers and voice and how that's influencing music. But I'm curious from yours. None of that matters to this conversation, but I just want to give you a sense, like, if you put on a futurist hat, are there things that you're like, I'm wondering this, or I'm curious about that?
Well, what I'm wondering, so the thing that I think the industry is wondering and executing on now is the very obvious presence, but not yet shift to the mobile side of music making.
Oh, yes.
And it's one of those things, just like, when Rebirth and Reason were arriving on the scene. That was at a time when people were sort of wondering, people were having discussions where they'd say, I think this computer is going to play a big role in music making. And we have that sense with the mobile side of things right now that it's going to play a big role, and it's playing a role, but it's still very much that emerging thing where you're sort of waiting for the right spark to really suddenly take off in a way where it's like, oh, okay, now everybody's doing their music there, and everybody's and everyone's exploring it. We have mobile apps. We actually had an app. We have an app called Figure, which is a very sort of unique take on music making, where it's that shortening that path where we just get you down to actually making music and not trying to learn. We don't, not teaching you how to play a keyboard, and you don't have to learn music tech and production.
Dive in fast.
You just dive in fast, yeah. So the mobile side of things is definitely the emerging thing, but it's this weird thing because it's emerging, but it's here, so you're sort of aware of its presence. So the thing I'm wondering about is what is the after mobile thing?
Gotcha.
Because the form factor of the phone that we have, or the iPad, is still. It's obviously very modern technology, but it's now, 13, 14 years into the iPhone launch?
Yeah, so it's old now.
It's old now, yeah. So like I'm starting to wonder, like, what is the thing that in 8 years we're going to be
it makes sense to me.
Yeah.
We talk about music like water. We also talk about music like air, which we just started talking about this on the podcast here at NAMM because it came up with our conversation with Moog. And it's this idea of ambient technology. And so the idea that the concept that I put music like air out for is related to smart speakers. It's related to voice. So at the very least, to listen to music, you had to press the knob on your radio dial. The knob on the radio dial is the most prolific, powerful pieces of technology in music listening ever.
Right.
Because you start listening to music instantly. With Spotify, you can't even do that.
Right.
You have to start clicking around with your thumb and looking around. What am I going to play? And shit, this is heavy work, man. How do I? You got some crappy car dealer commercial when you press play on the radio, but you got music pretty quickly it's a lean back experience.
Right.
What you're asking is, what's the lean back experience for music making? And so that's where I say, okay, what if you don't touch, you don't see the technology, and you start making music?
Right.
That to me might be, maybe that's 2 or 3 phases down.
Sure.
I don't know.
Well, some of that stuff, yeah, you're right, and some of that stuff is getting explored now. I mean, even within the world that we live in with Reason, we have a player. One of those player devices that I was talking about that convert note input. One of them actually doesn't convert incoming note. It's called the quad note generator, and it is a algorithmic note generator, and you can control the way that its algorithm is generating those notes, but it's kind of it's a lean back experience, and it's when I first got the beta and I started using it, I started making music I would have never made in any way without it, and it still felt very like authentic to my style, but it was me working with this technology. And and it was lean back is a good phrase for it, because that really is how it kind of felt that if I did lean back, it would keep generating, and then I could go in and I could modify parameters and kind of change the way it was generating. But yeah,
dear Music Tectonics listener, I know you want a great idea out there. Here's your idea. We want a virtual, invisible music making smart speaker instrument where you talk to your Alexa or your Google Home or your Apple Home and say a few things, and then music starts coming out, and then you say a few things and it tweaks a little bit more.
Right.
There you go. There's your $1 billion idea here at Music Tectonics.
There's Imogen Heap's working on those gestural gloves,
the gloves,
right?
Yeah.
That's sort of headed in that direction, but it's also I've been seeing the TED Talk since before they had a name, but even that still, you're dealing with. It's not quite fully lean back. It's still
right.
It's gestural. It's active.
It's interesting because it's very physical, very tactile.
Yeah.
But there's no screen. There's no knobs.
That's true. That's
so,
true.
Yeah. Mimu. Mimu. M-I-M-U.
M-I-M-U.
Is what
Okay.
it goes by. Yeah. So cool. Well, that was fun. You guys are based out of Stockholm in Sweden. Sweden's having an outsized impact on the American music industry.
Yeah.
As an American, what do you think is giving Sweden such a strong music innovation bent that's actually succeeding so well over here?
So this is a thing I think about because I go over there and I see all the musicians that are over there. So first of all, Sweden is the number 3 music exporter in the world, which is crazy. U.S. number 1, UK number 2, and then Sweden.
Of actual content, created compositions and songs?
Yes, number 3 exporter.
What Swedish bands am I listening to that I don't know about?
Well, so you've got the obvious, the ABBA and Roxette.
It's all ABBA. Oh, God.
No, you got all those. But you've got, for example, on the production side, Max Martin. Are you familiar with Max Martin, the producer? Okay, so you're familiar with his songs, I guarantee it. Max Martin is sort of the sound of pop music that we've known since he did a tune with Robin back in the I want to say late '90s that set up the boy band era. He did NSYNC, he did Backstreet Boys, then he did he's done Taylor Swift and Katy Perry and like all this. But that's
Swedish music.
That's Swedish. It's the sound of Swedish producers working with U.S. artists that make that sound.
And do you think that pop orientation presence there is part of this kind of technology wave coming from Sweden as well?
I think so. So the why I think it's happening is my hunch has always been Sweden invests a lot in music education. So when you're coming up in school in Sweden, we sort of have if you look at the last 40 years of U.S. education, we've got dwindling budgets. Marching bands are losing their instruments, and there's community fundraisers, and how can we save the choir or whatever. They've been doing the opposite. They've been pumping money into educating their kids in music education, and you see the result. They grow up, they all play instruments, they all have a certain musical talent, whether they use it or not. You might once you're out of school, like I took Spanish in school. I don't really speak much Spanish anymore, but there are also that number of kids that come out of school with that music education and they go into music, and so you've got just this huge constant influx of Swedes getting well educated in music. And then on the other side of things, Stockholm is very much one of the European tech centers. So you've got on the gaming side, you've got DICE games that's based out of Stockholm. You've got Spotify, coming out of Sweden, and then you've got other tech, Skype, all these things we know that came from Sweden. And so you take the convergence of a population that's been educated in music and a tech capital, and it's kind of the perfect incubator for music tech.
We're doing a longer episode than usual because I'm having so much fun talking to you, and we kind of got started early, which is great. But what do you get out of coming to NAMM? maybe personally as well as
Personally,
from a reason standpoint.
So, I mean, this is one of the few places in the world in the calendar year where you can sort of get a sense of where are things at, where are things going, what are the trends, so there's that invaluable. You walk the show floor, to anyone who's never come to the NAMM show, it's kind of like a rock concert meets a college fair in the way that you
It really is.
Yeah, it's like you go from booth to booth and everybody's showing off this super cool technology, but it's in this dense format where you just walk 20 feet and now you're looking at something else really cool and cutting edge and new. And so in that sense, for us, it's a great way to get a sense of kind of where things are at, but also to meet, we're meeting the whole time we're here, we're meeting with Reason artists who make music with Reason, artists who have an interest in Reason and we're kind of getting them up to speed on it. Influencers, that's sort of the new category of YouTube vloggers and stuff that have been talking about music making, and they've either been talking about Reason already or we'd like to kind of show them Reason. So there's that element that we can kind of talk to people here. So it's valuable from a Reason perspective and a Reason Studios perspective in that sense. For me, it's also something of a family reunion where you get to, all the people that you haven't seen all year, and you're all spread out and you're all at different sectors of the music tech world, and we all converge for a weekend of
fun work.
Fun work. Yeah, that's a good combo. Yeah.
And if you weren't working, what booths would you be going to? What would you be testing out yourself for your own music? What events would you be going to? Are there panels or showcases, or more just like, I've always wanted to try, or I always keep an eye on this company, they make such a cool blank?
Well, that's where I start wearing my two hats. So, like yesterday I had a free 20 minutes or something between two meetings, and I went down to the Deering banjo booth, which is like sort of it was almost like the anti-phase polar opposite of
this
everything.
Is your therapeutic
antidote.
Totally.
My therapeutic antidote, right. I'm just going to go palate cleanse myself with a little banjo for 20 minutes. But no, there's, I'm an audio engineer in my professional background before I was a videographer and before I was involved in music tech. And so I just, as a sort of fan, that same 14-year-old kid that was, reading the manuals for how to use his Mackie mixer now goes to the Mackie booth to see what they're up to, or, goes and looks at sort of the, latest mic. I was up at the Audix microphone booth, checking out they've got a nice mic that I wanted to look at. So that's the sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's cool.
You just go around. It's the fandom is still there. 18 NAMM shows later.
That's awesome. That's great, man. Well, Ryan, this has been a blast. Is there anything else you'd like to plug? Any holes you'd like to fill before we wrap up? Or if you don't have that, where can people see your videos?
Right. Well, if anyone out there is interested in getting started making music and hasn't yet, we obviously would encourage them to take a look at Reason, and they can do so at reasonstudios.com. They can look at us on Instagram and Twitter, and all those are handles at Reason Studios, so it's pretty simple enough to find us wherever we are. And if almost an even bigger if you're someone who is currently making music and had heard of Reason but chose a different DAW, or used Reason and then moved on to another DAW, the big thing that I would hope people know is that Reason now running as a plugin in other DAW hosts means that it is available to you again, or available to you in a way that it hasn't been before. And so I would hope people would kind of take a look at Reason and see what it could do for their music, because it certainly can do a lot. I can attest to that personally.
Awesome. And any artist name people can look out for out there in the world for you? Do you go by something? You have recordings out there?
Just I'll
they have
go
to
by
catch you kind of on the street somewhere.
That's right. I live happily on the sideman side of the equation.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Ryan, this has been a blast. Thanks for so much for taking so much time out of your NAMM experience.
No problem. It's been fun.
And I wish you a happy NAMM.
Okay, cool. You too.
And thank you for listening to Music Tectonics. We've got more coming from NAMM. Make sure to hit subscribe so you can hear all sorts of creative, crazy ideas, new releases, and big picture conversations. We'll be back with more.
You're listening to Music Tectonics.